So welcome everyone. It is 7 o'clock and I think we'll get started. I know there'll be a couple more people joining us as we get going, but I'm Kathy Scrimshaw. I'm the medical director for the Collaborative Mentorship Network, and it's my pleasure to have you to part 2 on ACT therapy with our colleague, Dr. Marie-Claire Bourque, who is joining us from Toronto today, and really pleased to have everyone join. Before we get started, we have a few things to go through. First of all, we would like to recognize that we're webcasting from and to many different parts of Alberta today. The province of Alberta is located on Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 territory, and is a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples. And as I said, I'm Kathy Scrimshaw, and I'm a family physician, and I am also a part-time paid employee of the Alberta College of Family Physicians. I don't have any other financial disclosures. This program does receive financial support through a Health Canada Substance Use and Addictions Program contribution. It does not receive any in-kind support, and it is presented by the Alberta College of Family Physicians. So this is the housekeeping part of the night. To capture your attendance, if you can click on the survey link in the chat log to enter your name and email. And we will be using the chat log to collect questions, which we can answer at the end of the session. You can also raise your hand if you have a burning question, and we'll try to get that answered right away. We are using breakout rooms during the session. So when you see the join button appear on your screen, please click on it to participate. And we have an evaluation survey link that'll be posted in the chat log near the end of the session. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Marie-Claire Bourque, who's joining us from Toronto. She was a practicing psychiatrist in Calgary and moved to Toronto. And I think we're all very lucky to have her present a tough act to follow: acceptance and commitment therapy and family medicine. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Marie-Claire Bourque. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kathy, and thank you for having me. You can see my screen okay and hear me okay? Thumbs up, Carrie?
You're good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, I currently live in Toronto. I'm a psychiatrist working at CAMH. I did my medical school at the University of Calgary and did my residency training in Halifax, and then practiced at the Foothills Medical Center for the first 3 years of my practice. And my financial disclosures, I did a couple of speaking engagements for pharma, but then I moved to big business and sports. So you can see there, I do consulting for the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, and the National Ballet. And I have a part-time clinical position at CAMH. And I do some consulting work as well for other business or private organizations. I always like to start with the last slide first. So if you're gonna leave, like if this is the only time you're gonna stay and you're gonna go do your laundry thereafter, this is what you need to leave with. So ACT is not about fixing problems. So even though we have problems, we can still live a life that is meaningful. ACT doesn't fix all problems, but it changes the way, or it encourages us to change the way that we interact with our problems. ACT is about how we choose to engage with our life. If you are human, you will have problems. You will have distress. It's about how you engage with those problems and that distress that really dictates the quality and the purpose and the vitality of your life. So you can leave, we're done after that. Learning objectives, I hope that you go away with a few things. I as a psychiatrist, we're taught to prescribe a lot of medications. We're taught about CBT, we're taught about DBT. Acceptance and commitment therapy is really something that I had to seek out on my own in my last year of training, and it's something that I've been practicing ever since. I got the chance to work with a chronic pain clinic in Calgary, doing acceptance and commitment therapy specifically for people who are experiencing pain. I've also done it with trans-diagnostic groups, meaning people with anxiety, depression, personality, substance. And I try to implement little tidbits here and there whenever I can in any type of clinical encounter. So learning objectives, I'd like you to go away with how to implement a structured approach to brief ACT. So ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy interventions. Number 2, learn how to use committed action and willingness as methods to affect change. And number 3, understand the importance of values-based interventions. So I don't know about you, but oftentimes when people come to my clinic, whether it's at CAMH or whether they're part of a professional sports organization, Dr. Bourque, I just want to feel better. ACT might not get you to feel better. It might not get anybody to feel better. What I want you to consider is, what about, rather than feeling better, we start moving towards, I want to live better. There's a couple of assumptions that we make with acceptance and commitment therapy. And this is really important, and there's a lot more, but these are kind of the important ones and the ones that I want us to focus on, is that all behaviors serve a purpose. Evolution, but also in our own life. All behaviors have been shaped and formed secondary to getting some type of love or food or safety, and getting away from things that we don't want, like punishment or fear. So all behaviors that continue to exist in our lives today serve a purpose, and they've evolved from some types of sustained patterns to get us love and acceptance and belonging as a social species, as humans, and get away from things that we don't want to experience, like fear, shame, etc. Language matters. So why do I say language matters? As human beings, we have this beautiful capacity to talk to one another using language, which means that we can communicate how to build bridges and how to solve global pandemics. But it also means that we have this superb capacity to talk to ourselves in our heads. And the problem with that is we believe what we tell ourselves to be true with 100% conviction unless we examine those thoughts. So what we tell ourselves matters. What we talk to ourselves, how we talk to ourselves about how we see ourselves, others in the world, we believe that to be true until we examine it. I want us to challenge ourselves to move away from fixing the problem. The problem in ACT isn't actually the problem. The problem is our misguided desire to control, change, modify, avoid the problem. And I also want us to consider that small interventions can have a meaningful impact. This is a beautiful example of how language matters and how language can be a curse of the human social species that we are. I was driving home one day. I was actually driving home from the Foothills Medical Center on my way to a boxing studio that I loved. It's called Undercard. If anyone lives in Calgary, go to Undercard. I don't know if it's open. Toronto's been closed forever. So you know what? I don't know what Calgary's doing these days. It's probably closed. But I was observing a group of geese, and I was thinking to myself, I bet the geese that's in 4th place isn't judging himself or herself compared to the geese that's in 3rd or 2nd or 1st. I bet the geese that's kind of at the top of the V isn't saying like, hey, it's not fair. I've been in this top of the V forever. Like, when's the next guy's turn? They're just being geese, doing their job, living their life, getting the things that they need to get done. They're just flying. Language isn't impacting their capacity to do what they want to do in their life. Humans, if this was humans, the person at the top of the V would be complaining about how long he or she has been at the top of the V, and the person in the 4th place would be complaining or talking to themselves or comparing themselves and using language to actually prevent them from obtaining their ultimate goal. Okay, so how do we actually implement a structured approach to brief acceptance and commitment therapy interventions? So the evidence is there. The evidence is really there for transdiagnostic purposes. So if you have patients that have like a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of depression, a little bit of personality, great. You can use acceptance and commitment therapy. If you have a patient that has chronic pain, there's excellent evidence for chronic pain. You might have heard of FACT versus ACT. FACT is just focused acceptance commitment therapy. And briefly, all it is this is ACT. So there's a couple kind of categories in each. So acceptance, willingness, and I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail later. So don't feel like I'm just blasting through these. But acceptance and commitment therapy includes acceptance and willingness, diffusion, so defusing from your thoughts that you believe to be true 100% of the time, awareness of the present moment, so being in the here and now, not in the past or not in the future, not in somebody else's head, but here. Using yourself as context, meaning that you're aware of yourself, that you're aware of the stories and the rules that you tell yourself, and you're not attached to those rules and stories. Values, and your committed action. FACT kind of makes it a little bit simpler, and rather than having 6 different categories that you have to worry about, really the focused acceptance commitment therapy FACT, it simplifies it. You want people, yourself included, to open up to possibilities, open up to what's there, be aware of the present moment, be aware of yourself, be aware of your environment, and then start doing what matters. And it's not a 1, 2, 3 scenario. It's a open up, be aware, do what matters, be aware, do what matters, open up, do what matters, etc. It's fluid. So if you're struggling with the notorious or famous ACT hexaplex is what they say. There's 6 different components. You can make it, you can simplify it by using FACT. So open up, be aware, and do what matters. And really the whole point of ACT is moving from an inflexible mindset and perspective in life to a flexible perspective and mindset. So what does opening up mean? Acceptance and cognitive diffusion. So I've given a few examples of what an inflexible perspective would be and what a flexible perspective would be. Inflexible in terms of acceptance would be avoidance. So what is the inflexible perspective of acceptance? It's avoidance. So avoiding the thing, avoiding your life. So alcohol, Netflix, excuses, really any type of avoidance. My favorite type of avoidance is Netflix and ordering a pizza and a glass of wine. That's like my favorite type of avoidance. And we all have favorite types of avoidance. So even being aware of what yours and your patients, I'm speaking about us because oftentimes we have to understand our own process in order to help other people. So what are your own type of avoidance patterns? I just see a question here and I'm going to address it very quickly. Or right away, I should say. Is it me, or does ACT presentation challenge one to examine their own mindset? Is that the point? So I think it would be more about moving from an inflexible mindset to a flexible mindset. So yes, it challenges somebody to look at how they're currently living, not only thinking, but how they're currently living, moving from rigid, inflexible thought patterns and behaviors to a more flexible, open thought pattern, mindset, and behaviors. It is a behavior therapy, meaning that you need to do things differently in order to actually affect change. So in keeping with the doing things differently, acceptance or willingness would be, even though the problem that I have is still there, I'm not going to hang out on my couch and avoid and drink wine and watch like 5 hours of Netflix. I'm actually going to leave the house, even with my depression, even with my anxiety, and go to my son's baseball game, even when I'm anxious. The problem doesn't have to be fixed. How much discomfort and am I willing to tolerate to live the life that I want to live? Inflexible cognitive fusion. We believe our thoughts to be true. My thought must be true. It's in my brain. I believe my brain all the time. Therefore, it must be true. I'm fused with it. If I think to myself, I'm a loser, I'm fusing with that thought and I believe it to be true 100% of the time. If I defuse with my thought, therefore move away from my thought, I can look at my thought as just what it is. It's literally just words that my brain is telling my brain, and that's it. And there are different strategies, but a lot of them have to do with simply examining the fact that your thoughts are just words, and you do not have to believe your thoughts to be true. And a thought can be there and you can still do what you want to do with your life. Inflexible, from moving from inflexible to flexible. So an inflexible approach to present moment awareness would be fused with your past, ruminating about the past, poring over past hurts, victimized over previous experiences, or worrying about the future. Flexible approach would be present moment awareness. I am aware that I am here right now in this moment and in this space, and I am open to my experience. Attachment, so moving away from attachment to the conceptualized self, which is an inflexible process, to a flexible process, which is yourself as context. Attachment to the conceptualized self, well, the story that you tell yourself about yourself. You end up being a cartoon character. We all end up being a cartoon character in our head. We all have stories about who we are based on our past, based on what our experiences. And when we move away from that, we really truly experience, or we truly gain an understanding of, actually all I am is awareness. And all of the stories that I've been telling myself about myself, while they're stories, I could also do other things, and I could also experience other things. It's unsticking yourself from the story. If I was to stick to my story about who I was an academic psychiatrist, like super kind of keener. And I never would have started working with professional sports teams. And I would have been, in tertiary care centers, which is fine. Not dissing that at all. That's where I was, but it was a story that I was telling myself about what I needed to do, not what I actually valued. And we all have those stories, and becoming aware of those stories and moving away from them is moving into the self as context. Inflexible versus flexible. Committed action is a flexible approach. We really want that with acceptance and commitment therapy. Inflexible is inaction, impulsivity, and avoidance. So consumed by not feeling something that you stop doing. So consumed by not failing, not being scared, not being anxious, that you stop doing. Committed action, do things that help you live the life that you want to live. Do things that bring you closer to a values-based life. Inflexible versus flexible with regards to values. So lack of values clarity is an inflexible approach, kind of arbitrarily picking goals based on pros and cons and living passively, letting life happen to you, not based on your values, perhaps based on what you have always thought that you want to do or other people have told you to do. Values-based living is truly identifying what you actually value, not what you've been told to value, not what you've always valued, but truly identifying what it is you value, becoming super clear on those values, and deciding to commit yourself to living into those values one step at a time, one day at a time. All right, so suggested approaches. Number one, I always suggest making room for the perspective that what you're doing right now might not be working. You're really trying, but it might not be working. And with the help of these amazing people, Kathy and Carrie and Agatha, we put together a worksheet for your use, for your patient use, for whatever, for making room for a new perspective. And I'm going to skip ahead really quickly, then come back to that slide. But making room for a new perspective it's not about getting the person to feel bad about what they've been doing. It's about identifying that they've been trying really, 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 really hard to get rid of or to modify or to fix or to change the problem. And the energy that they've been putting into fixing, modifying, changing, willing away the problem is actually more energy than the problem is taking itself. So everything that you've been doing, everything that we've been doing to fix, modify, et cetera, the problem is more energy consuming than the actual problem. And Agatha is saying that if anybody didn't receive the worksheets, that to let them know, because they sent them this morning. And I use an example, but essentially the problem, so say for instance, the problem is anxiety. All of the things that you've tried, it might be medication, it might be avoidance, it might be this group or that group, it might be alcohol, it might be drugs, it might be kind of sitting in your bedroom with your windows closed and your sheets above your head. All of those things might actually be taking away from your life more than the actual problem of anxiety. The next thing is to decide what matters. So decide what matters to you. What are the values that actually make you tick? How do you want to live your life? Not what you've always been told that you value, not what you think you should value, but what you actually value. And then the next part, and this is in the same worksheet. Again, you were emailed them this morning. If you don't have them, you can email Agatha and Carrie. Decide what matters to you and start doing things that bring you closer to those values, step by step. Understand that the more you start really becoming uncomfortable with not living into your values, the more you want to live into your values. But additionally, the really key piece is that you might have to experience some discomfort along the way. You might have to experience some whatever it is along the way because you're doing something different. Whenever we start doing something different, we can become uncomfortable. The reason that we've been stuck in this comfort zone for so long is because it's comfortable. It's nice and cozy. Like you start, putting plants up, you start kind of bringing in the teapot and the blanket and the music. You don't want to leave. So committing yourself to, if I'm living like this, but I really want to be living there, I'm going to experience some discomfort along the way. And how much are you willing to experience? And then along the way, continuously noticing your self-limiting beliefs and accept that other perspectives could be true. So the belief that you have about yourself, the world, and others, just becoming aware that those beliefs are there and being aware that there may be other perspectives and those other perspectives may also be true. So first poll, I want us to, before we do the poll, I want you to think of a problem in your life right now, a problem that you might not have that much control over. So if it's like, you have a flat tire, that's not a problem that I want us to consider here because you can just fix the flat tire. But a problem that you may not have that much acute control over. So think of the problem. And now we're gonna launch the poll. And I want you to think about what you've done to try to get rid of, modify, etc., the problem that is there in your life. So pretend it doesn't exist, worry, talk about it, avoid, substances, others. Okay, we're getting a lot of worriers. We've got a lot of worries. I know that, I don't know about you, but like whenever I worry, that typically doesn't work to like solve all the problems that I have in my life. It typically just kind of, gives me a headache. Pretend it doesn't exist. Yep, I've been there. Well, 38% of us on this call have been there. Talk about it. avoid. I'm a like master of Netflix is like my go-to for, avoidance. Substances, very common as well, and other. So this just goes to show that, as human beings, we have a tendency to try to fix, modify, solve whatever the problem, and it might not always be in keeping with a values-based life. Typically, when I ask people how they want to live, what they really value, worrying is not one of the things that they kind of talk about how they want to live. Avoidance of life isn't a thing that they usually talk about how they want to live. Substances usually isn't like a value that they truly cherish. Pretending things don't exist usually isn't a thing that people really want to live into. So, values. How do we actually pick our values? So I actually have the next poll right away. So poll number 2, in your life, how much time are you spending living into your values? So if you think of your day, your week, your month, your year, what percentage are you actually spending living into the things that you actually care about and what you want your life to be about? We're getting varied results here. We've got some 21 to 40s. We've got some below 50s. We've got some above 50s. And kind of the more common would be around the 60 to 80. Yeah, that's what I see. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. Living 100% is not a good thing or a bad thing. It just is what it is. And that's the awareness. And it's our awareness and our decisions about how we want to live that I really want to get across. Okay, so values. When I was first introduced to values, when I first did my training in acceptance and commitment therapy, I was in my 5th year of residency training in Halifax. And I was doing, I did kind of a split year of neuropsychiatry, so the super biological psychiatry, and the kind of fluffy part of psychiatry therapy. I loved therapy. I was super biologic throughout my residency, and I thought that everything could be explained by serotonin or norepinephrine. And I found that I was desperately wrong, not only by research standards, but also from my own experience. And I started learning acceptance and commitment therapy. And my mentor at the time, she was like, well, what do you value? I was like, well, friends, health, family. And she was like, no, MC. People call me MC, Marie Claire. What do you actually value? Like, what do you actually care about in this world? And I was like, well, I just told you. She's like, no, but like, have you actually thought about it? And it made me really uncomfortable because, yeah, I had an automatic response, but I hadn't really thought about how I actually wanted to live. I had goals based on, I don't know, what I always thought I wanted or what other people told me I should want. But I soon realized that once I started doing this work, that my goals were just based on my ego. My goals were based on getting external validation, based on ego, and that's it. And it made me really sad, angry, and it also really challenged me to contemplate how I made decisions. And in that last year, I really wanted to go into a neuropsychiatry fellowship at Stanford. And instead, I, finished residency and took a job that I wanted to do as opposed to just go do a postgraduate fellowship based on my ego and needing external or wanting external validation. And once you become aware of your values, life and decision-making just becomes easier. So I always consider values as a roadmap. If you don't know where you're going, it's really hard to make decisions on whether to turn left or turn right or take this exit or that exit. Once you get really, really, really clear on your values, decision-making just becomes easier. there's one of the workshops we made is a values and committed action workshop. And the first part, it's kind of just establishing why values are important. And the second page, we list a number of different values. And I just want you to kind of skim through that, kind of skim where you are in that, if you kind of identify with any of those values. And I want you to pick one, and it doesn't have to be on that list, but I want you to pick a value that like you've either thought of or you see on that list. And I want you to kind of to think about it. Myself, I'm lucky that I've done this work and I continuously come back to this work all of the time. And yeah, I do it on my patients, but my patients, you know, people have a pretty good BS meter. Like if I'm telling them something and I'm not doing it myself, like they're able to tell. So I always find that it adds a lot of credibility, but I don't do it for the credibility. I do it because it just makes my life better when I make decisions based on values. So my values, freedom, health, love, creativity, and courage. I've had to make some very difficult, some important decisions based on those values. And not everybody around you is going to agree. But this is kind of a saying that I didn't make up, but when you're disappointing other people with your decisions, it means that you're not disappointing yourself. So when I'm making decisions based on my values of health, freedom, creativity, courage, and love, it might mean disappointing other people if I'm living into courage and being courageous, but it means that I'm not disappointing myself. So from this list, what do you see? What resonates with you or another value? And we're going to move into a breakout room. Now, in the breakout room, I'm going to first give you instructions. In the breakout room, I want you to pick one value that kind of resonates with you. Share what that value means to you. For instance, my value of love. I love my partner, and my value of love means that I'm present. It means that I'm aware. It means that I'm asking him questions and engaged and making sure that I put time and effort into our love relationship. So sharing that with your partner, with your group, what that means to you, whatever your value is. And if you're living into your value fully, what would your life look like? What would it look like on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? So for me, love, I'm having dinner, I'm making dinner with my partner. We're kind of spending the evening together, talking and doing things, living into our values of our relationship. And what is one step that you can take to bring yourself closer to that value that you've shared? So in your groups, you'll have 6 minutes. So it's going to be quick. So by quick, I mean, I mean quick. So 6 minutes, pick a value, share what you mean by that value. And if you're living into that value fully, what would your life look like? And maybe you can consider one step that you can take to bring yourself closer to living truly into that value. So I hope that was okay. Can I have one person? You know what? We're going to share at the end. I hope that was okay. So what we want to do now that we know our values and we're really like aware of what they mean to us and how it would look like if we were living into those values on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, we want to actually affect change and commit to change and start taking action on those values. Because if we have values and we just do everything the same, nothing's going to change in our life. We actually have to do things differently. So this is a little diagram of, how people might be feeling, not us on the call, but maybe some of us on the call, of how you're currently living, how we're currently living, how we want to live, and kind of this uncomfortableness or this fear and anxiety about what we have to do from how we're currently living to how we want to live. And this little piece requires us to feel somewhat uncomfortable. Now, acceptance and commitment therapy, people often say I just have to accept what's happened to me, just especially people who are in pain, I just accept that this pain has happened to me. No. And I want to encourage us to start using, instead of using perhaps acceptance all the time, think of it as willingness. Are you willing to live and do things that might bring you towards a more fulfilling, whole, values-based life, even though the pain is there? So are you willing to do things that might bring you from where you are to where you want to be, even though this problem, this thing is still there? So you're not accepting things, but you're engaging in this willingness to do things differently. So this is a very, very important concept. Willingness, acceptance. Are you willing to commit to actions that will enhance your life, even if there will be discomfort, and even if the problem still exists? If the person that you're speaking to or the person that you're working with is saying, you know what, no, I'm not willing to do any of this, then acceptance and commitment therapy isn't going to work. The person has to be willing to commit to some type of action that will enhance their life, even if there will be some discomfort there, and even if the problem may still exist. So acceptance, and this is another key point, is that acceptance involves being willing to experience all experiences. We cannot selectively numb undesirable experiences. I'm going to say that again. We cannot selectively numb out the undesirable experiences. If you're going to be willing, if you want to be able to be present and aware and live and be joyful and engage in life for the good stuff, you're going to also need to do that for the not so good stuff. You can't selectively numb. I wish, I'm sure we all wish, but we can't. We can numb out for everything, or we can numb out for none of it. And this is another really important concept, especially when we're dealing with people who are experiencing pain. And although I can't pretend to have experienced chronic pain, I tell this story as kind of an example. 3 years ago, 2018, I don't even know what year it is anymore. It's like still 2020, whatever. 2018, I went skiing and I fell, and I thought it was like a really great skier. Turns out like I'm not a great skier. Anyway, fell, hurt my knee, skied, got lunch, like iced my knee, and then skied down the hill. And next morning got up and kind of went on the bike. I was like, oh, my knee's really sore. Okay, sure. It was kind of bruised. And I'm like, oh, it might actually be like something that I should maybe check out at some point. In my psychiatrist's mind, I thought, okay, maybe it's like unresolved issues with my mother. But eventually, after walking on my bruised knee for a couple of weeks in my high heels, going to the hospital every day, I went to the doctor, and I got the x-ray, and there was a fractured femoral condyle. And the moment I got that news, my pain became excruciating. I canceled all of my weekend plans because it was on Friday, canceled all of my weekend plans, went to my avoidance tactics of Netflix, ordering pizza, and like I ordered pizza and chicken wings and wine, all of the things. And instead of just experiencing the pain, the physical pain that was there, I engaged in suffering that was different. So the pain was there the whole time. The pain was there for 2 weeks. And all of a sudden, when somebody told me that I had a femoral condyle fracture, my behavior then shifted to suffering. I didn't need to order Netflix. I didn't need to order pizza. I didn't need to avoid my life and my friends for like a week and kind of feel sorry for myself. I didn't need to do any of that, but I did. So the difference between pain and suffering, and your behaviors are what really lead you to suffering and lead us to suffering. Again, ACT is a behavioral therapy. So yes, there's a mindset involved, and the mindset really involves shifting away from our rigid, inflexible approach to our own life and our own perspective, moving away from that, but also the behaviors. in order to live a life that is different, in order to have change, we need to start doing things differently. So in order to have change, we need to act and behave differently. So again, you saw this first slide already. I'll leave it here and I'll kind of speak about it again. So even though we have problems, we can still live a life that is meaningful. ACT does not fix all of our problems. It hopes to change the way that we interact with our problems. ACT is about how we choose to engage with our life. So with that, I'll move to questions in one moment, but just from a very practical perspective, when we're talking to patients and engaging with patients, it's really important that we kind of highlight their ownership and their behaviors, that they really have ownership in how they decide to live, what they value and what they choose to do and what they choose not to do. And oftentimes as a doctor, we're kind of taught to rescue and save the day, but ACT is not about saving the day. It's about being an equal. It's about reflection. It's about asking the person how they want to live, you know, helping them understand that how they're currently behaving may not be in line with their values, helping them establish their values, and then helping them commit to actions that will actually help them live into their values on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. So with that, I've got a bunch of references. And with that, we have 12 minutes for questions, and I'm happy to take some questions really about any or all of it.
And so if people have questions, they can just unmute and ask away. If there's a bunch of questions, you can put up your hand and then we'll see you and we can do it in order. But please go ahead. We've got some time with an ACT therapist, and I see Dino has unmuted.
Hi, thanks.
Go ahead, Dino.
Thanks, Marie-Claire. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Thank you for the presentation. Extremely engaging, and it's funny how you know I mentioned in the chat that I feel like I'm in a therapy session whenever I attend a acceptance commitment therapy presentation. It's really uniquely it's unique in that way. I'm just wondering, like in terms of family physicians in the community, where I think we all kind of struggle to practice this without having some kind of formal training. And although it's pretty intuitive, I mean, after you've heard a few presentations, do you think that this is something that we can take away and just practice with what you've described tonight, or would you recommend that we're more formally trained before we try to use some of these techniques? Thanks.
Great question. And, you know, I think everybody has a great deal of respect for family. I certainly have a great deal of respect for family physicians. You just have to know it all and do it all. There isn't really, I mean, there is training, but you don't need formal training. I technically don't have formal training, even though I have training. So I would say that you can start right away. And again, as if we're kind of going meta and experiential, if you want to be engaging and kind of practicing ACT, you know, committing to actions that will actually bring you towards that might involve taking some pieces of this and practicing and understanding that, you know, that story that you've told yourself about needing to be the literal expert and perfect may not be true. You know, you can also, you can pick some pieces and you can try some things on, and really moving away from that conceptualized self of I need to be an expert and perfect in order to do the thing that I want to do. Moving away into that I'm a doctor and I want to help this patient, and this patient might benefit from some of the skills that I've recently obtained. So we're going to try it out. And I'm going to commit to taking some pieces and actually practicing. What do you think of, how do you feel about that approach?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think that the framework is something that we're all equipped to at least start, maybe doing a little bit more reading and just the same kind of lifelong learning. You know, it's not like you just learn something and that's it. We're continually challenged to keep up, and I think this is just part of the same process. It's just a little bit unique in the way that it almost feels like we should all be in some kind of therapy ourselves, just to benefit us as physicians. Thanks.
I will never not have a therapist. I'm just going to be upfront. I will never, for the life, for as long as I'm capable of having a therapist, I will never not have a therapist. And I recommit to my goals kind of on a quarterly basis. But in terms of, you know, as you're practicing in practice, a really great place to start is, you know, I've sent worksheets, and certainly I hope they're helpful. What do you value, person? And what are you, you know, what are you willing to kind of experience in terms of discomfort? And are you willing to experience discomfort in order to get to the life that you actually value and want? And what's a step that you can take to get there? You know, what you did in your breakout rooms would be a great start.
That was way harder than it seems. It was difficult. Really, I don't think I'm prepared to do that yet. It's funny.
Great. So MC Yasmin has a question. So do you want to unmute and go ahead, Yasmin?
Thanks, Chris, Kathy. So first of all, thank you for such a insightful presentation. I work with chronic pain patients, so I could identify a lot of things you said. And so one thing that I can take away is the value piece is really important, and the willingness, I think, is that what I can take from this conversation to my patients. And you've done it really simply. So it's a simple thing to say, but it just is thought-provoking. So thank you for that. I was just wondering, like on the lines of what Dino said, are there more courses that if somebody's more interested and they can learn more about it in a formal way?
Yeah, you know, everyone always asks me that. There is, I think Stephen Hayes, who kind of like, who literally invented with Russ Harris acceptance commitment therapy. They do have this private company. They run out of the US. And so if you Google like ACT therapy teaching online, it's contextual behavioral sciences is it's the kind of the group that puts it on. And I'm forgetting the name of the private company, but Stephen Hayes will be putting on a session or putting on a workshop. You know, it's a lot of money. But if you're interested in learning more formally, they do have workshops available online. And if you want, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact name of it. I can certainly send that to Kathy and Carrie and for distribution if you want, if that would be helpful.
Thanks. Thank you. Just to have that handy would be great. Yep. Thanks.
And we have another question from Tina, if you want to unmute and go ahead, and we'll definitely send that information out.
Thank you very much. The presentation was excellent. I really like the questions that you presented so that we can determine whether patients are ready for ACT or not. I'm wondering though, are there certain things that patients do or say that might gear us towards, oh, well, maybe I should actually ask these questions to the patient rather than kind of go along and ask everyone?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, are there further clues?
If you're seeing a patient that's kind of always coming to you kind of hum-ha about their life, there may not be, you know, they might have clinical depression or subclinical or anxiety or subclinical anxiety, somebody who's experiencing those types of things, that would be completely appropriate for you to say, oh, remember that thing that I thought about, the acceptance commitment therapy? Tell me, like right now you're experiencing a residual depression or whatever. Tell me about how you're spending your time. How do you want to be spending your time? What do you value? What do you value in your life? What actions are you taking to actually, live the life that you want? What stories are you telling yourself about yourself? What stories are you telling yourself about depression, anxiety?
So what I hear is just trying to get a sense of how they're using their time, using that to open up. And if it seems like they're using all those more distracting techniques, that would be patients to kind of engage in more questions about whether they're ready for ACT then.
Or yes, yeah, absolutely. So that's yes. And in addition to that, people who have really engaged in a lot of problem solving around a certain problem. So I've tried this and 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 this, and I can't seem to solve whatever problem it is. Well, have you tried to, step back from the problem and kind of engage in your life, even though the problem is still there? Like, are there things in your life that you can still do if the problem is there? What if the problem doesn't go away? Are there things that you can do that would make you live a more values-based life, even with this problem still here?
All right, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah.
And great.
Drake.
Sorry. Sorry, MC. Drake, you're up.
Hi there. Sorry, just a quick comment. Great presentation. Just being a quick comment with ACT. I see a lot of background where I work is within specifically chronic pain, but a lot of colleagues we're doing chronic disease management. So the Alberta Healthy Living Program there. We employ health change methodology, and I see a lot of very similar principles and theories talked about here. So I just wanted to kind of encourage anyone that's, if this is kind of giving you an itch to learn more of this, there's a lot of room for this, not just in anxiety and addiction and chronic pain, but also within other chronic diseases as well when we're looking at self-management tools. So I think physicians we're good at recognizing the practical aspects, but I think ACT really dives into the mental aspects, again, the values-based to help clients build on that self-management piece and empower them. So this just kind of motivated me to dive into this research again. So thanks for presenting. I appreciate it.
Thanks for sharing that, Drake. I really appreciate it and agree. Thank you.
Well, we're winding down now. Is there any other questions? I know it's getting late in Toronto for MC, but I really appreciate the talk once again. And I'm in Dino's camp. I always feel like I'm in therapy when I do these sessions, and that I need to figure out, where I'm going in my life. But one thing that I often think is this would be very applicable to an organization as well. Are we moving our organization? Am I moving, in the right direction with the values that we want to have? So it's another thing that crosses my mind all the time. Laura.
Just was going to ask you, MC, to just flash the references again, being very much in Dino's camp of, can I really do this without invoking harm with people? Oh, I'll have to compulsively read a little bit here. So, and really appreciate your really accessible approach today. That was really, really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And honestly, probably a workbook, probably the best workbook that I can recommend. And I would actually recommend doing the workbook more than I would academic reading. And the reason is it's all about experiential learning. And the more you learn experientially, the more that you can kind of give to your patients. This is the number one thing that I would recommend. It's called, it's by Stephen Hayes, and it's Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. So I'll repeat that. It is called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. And it's by Stephen Hayes, Hayes. And it comes in audiobook. So that's a plus, always.
That sounds great. And we'll add that to the list. We'll send out the slide decks. You'll get all the references, Laura. Just, I know you want them. And we'll send the presentation. We will post that on the discussion board in the Higher Logic or the ACFP community. So really appreciate everyone coming out, and I hope you found this valuable. I certainly did yet again. Our next collaboration forum will be occurring at noon. We heard you in the evaluation that 7:30 in the morning wasn't ideal. And we posted in the chat. One of our colleagues, Ryan Magnuson, is going to present his pain story and also his take on how the medical home and the medical community or neighborhood should be interacting with each other. And so looking at chronic pain and chronic pain in community and how we can manage it in a better way as a team. So hope you can join us then.